Extreme Force did a lot of interesting things to Qliphort. You'd probably be looking at me crazy if I told you that Qliphort was no longer a set 5 back row Helmet deck. I mean, Master Rule 4 did kind of change that. But even more importantly, Qliphort Genius and Full Metal Foes or Heavy Metal Foes Electromite introduced inside of the Extreme Force set changed Qliphort completely. In this deck profile, I'm going to be going over a competitive Qliphort deck profile that isn't Helmet. Who would have thought? Qliphort is actually a pendulum deck. Alright guys, so starting off with the monsters, one copy of Apoqliphort Towers. This card isn't as good as it used to be, but it's still pretty good. 3,000 body, forcing your opponent to send monsters from the field or hand to the graveyard, and also being unaffected by card effects. It's pretty damn strong. It also reduces your opponent's monsters by 500. When you couple it with your Qliphort scales, this card can be almost invincible. Fortunately, Yu-Gi-Oh has evolved that there are plenty of outs to this card, but it's still a marvel, and in certain situations will outright win you the game or straight up by himself. For the rest of the tribute monsters, 3 copies of Qliphort Stealth, 3 copies of Qliphort Disc, and 2 copies of Qliphort Shell. Now, the tribute monsters, they all have one thing in common. When they're tribute summoned, you get to gain an additional effect. Shell allows you to attack an additional time. Qliphort Stout allows you to return a card on the field to the hand, and Qliphort Disc is an OTK opportunity card, being able to special summon 2 Qliphort monsters from your deck to your side of the field. Now, Qliphorts do have a couple of restrictions. First of all, when they're in the scale, you can only special summon monsters. You can only special summon Qliphort monsters, period. I know in the game, go ahead and check that out because it was a pretty interesting game nonetheless. In the game, we special summoned monsters that weren't Qliphort while they were in the scales, and this deck profile was here to rectify that. Another thing about Qliphort is that they can be normal summoned without tribute. In that case, their attack or their level becomes 4 and their attack becomes 1800. If they're special summoned, the same thing. Their level becomes 4 and their attack becomes 1800. Those rules are pretty pivotal to the Qliphort strategy because Disc by himself cannot OTK. It can only inflict 6400 damage unless you were to flip a skill drain face up while you're attacking. So nonetheless, Disc can still inflict 6400 damage to your opponent, high amounts of damage just for a 1 tribute or for a tributed card. And Stealth is actually used to return cards, but the most important thing about Stealth is that your opponent can't respond to this card's effect. If you chain your helixes, your sacrifices, and your carriers correctly, with Stealth being 3, your opponent can't respond to any of those card effects, which makes Stealth a very important card to the strategy. Literally, Shell, we only play it because it's a 9 scale. You're kind of low on high scales, and this card's kind of there for it. That's it for the tribute Qliphort monsters, the monsters that you use normally to tribute summon. Now the Qli cards that deserve to be tributed: 3 copies of Qliphort Helix, 3 copies of Qliphort Carrier, and 2 copies of Qliphort Cephalopod. Now, these cards are very interesting. Helix, when tributed, allows you to destroy an opponent's spell or trap card. Carrier, when tributed, allows you to return an opponent's monster to the hand. Cephalopod, when tributed, allows you to gain the differential between the monsters in your graveyard and your opponent's graveyard times 300. Now, Helix and Carrier are going to be carrying the heals of your deck. Get it? Helix, Carrier, heal, carry, all right, whatever. And these are really important for OTK potential because Helix gets rid of back row and Qliphort Carrier gets rid of monster threats. Cephalopod, again, is majorly only played because it's a high scale, but the life point thing is pretty damn good. And the fact that you need as many Qliphort monsters in your deck as possible to be able to abuse some of your effects are still there. So that's another viable reason to play Cephalopods and Shells. They're really good Qliphort cards. Also, another thing I want to talk about is that another effect of your Qliphort cards being in the scale is that either they reduce the attack of your opponent's monsters or gain the attack of your Qliphort monsters. All the high scales reduce your opponent's monster attack, and all the low scales give your Qliphort monsters attacks. That is it for the tributable monsters. Now, these Qliphorts are supposed to be in the scale. Qliphort Scout is easily the best Qliphort, hands down. At the cost of 800 life points, you can search a Qli card from your deck to your hand. You can use this actually in conjunction with Stealth to bounce Scout back to your hand to activate Scout again and search another time. Being able to use Scout as many times in one turn is pretty pivotal for the deck. 3 copies of Qli Monolith. Basically, Monolith is really good, but not for the purposes you guys would think. Its effect is pretty good in itself. During the end phase, you get to draw cards up to the number of Qliphort monsters that were tributed that turn, and it doesn't have to see the cards being tributed in order for it to gain its effect. The reason why 3 Monolith is played in this deck is because it's a level 5 machine monster and easy access to infinity. Before, you would want this card in the scale, but now, seeing that they all Qliphort monsters at the claws, that you can only special summon nothing but Qliphort monsters, you normally want this card special summoned through this to make your Cyber Dragon infinity. Now, a change that I did make between the game that you guys saw, and again, if you haven't saw that game, then go ahead. If you haven't seen that game, then check it out. And this deck profile was that we play 3 copies of Performer Pro Trampolinx. This is the card you want in the scale, and it has a really good effect. While it's in the scale, if you pendulum summon, you get to return a card in the scale to the hand. So basically, after activating your Qliphort Scout searching, playing this card in the scale and then pendulum summoning, not only returns the Qliphort Scout in your hand for later use, but now you can special summon monsters from your extra deck to your side of the field that aren't Qliphort. Now you can special summon whatever you want to your side of the field. Another thing is when it's normal summoned, you get to bounce a card from your scale to your hand, so it has a versatility inside of the deck. It provides so many lanes for us to go into our extra deck and make those pivotal plays. 2 copies of Astrograph Sorcerer. This card's also really good. Anytime a monster or a card you control is destroyed, you can special summon Astrograph Sorcerer and then furthermore search a card from your deck to your hand. Astrograph Sorcerer will be used a lot in this deck because we'll destroy our Qli scales quite a bit just so we can special summon different types of monsters. Astrograph Sorcerer does provide that boost that we need, as well as it works really well with Wavering Eyes, being able to special summon itself to a side of the field, get some scales into the extra deck, as well as search what we need from the extra deck back into our hand. So that's it for the non-Qli pendulum monsters, and that's it for all of the monsters. And what I think is 28 for the spells, 3 copies of Sacrifice. So many sacrifices. I done gave up so much time, knowing time ain't free. So fucking I sacrificed it. Sacrifice is a really good card in here. And the reason being is that not only does it make your monster that it equips itself to indestructible by battle, and when it's sent to the graveyard, it gets you a search of a Qli monster, but it can make a Qli monster be treated as 2 tributes for a tribute summon, and that is exactly what this deck needs. So happy that the February list brought this card to 3. 3 copies of Summoner's Art. This card is used mainly to get into your Qliphort Scout, but you actually do play other targets which inside of Qliphort Monolith. 3 copies of Pot of Desires. This card means nothing to the deck. Seriously, as long as you don't banish Scout, go crazy, which means you probably already searched Scout or you couldn't get in a Scout anyways. So Pot of Desires is literally the freest card. I don't think I've played a deck where Pot of Desires is more free in. Oh, actually, Shiranui, but still, it's pretty free in this deck, saying that after Scout, you don't care what's get banished. 3 copies of Wavering Eyes. This allows you to destroy your scales and rid yourself of the Qli restriction, but more importantly, allows you to search a Qli or a pendulum monster that you need from your deck to your hand. 2 copies of Laser Clip. This card's actually really good. This card used to be terrible for the Qli strategy, but the ability to gain an additional normal summon is pivotal, especially when links are the thing to do, and having multiple monsters on the board are what thrives. It actually fuels the OTK. 1 copy of Skill Drain. When you flip this card face up, you're probably going to win the game because now your opponent no longer has the resources. And then 1 copy of Climate Change. I'll destroy Qliphort Scout quite a bit. And then there's a lot of times where you'll have that extra search. So search that Climate Change and add that Qli Scout from your deck to your hand. More often than not, it's better off in your extra deck. You're better off clearing your scales because if you're playing against the Pendulum Magician matchup, your opponent likely will have Wavering Eyes, which will ruin your day. Again, the reason why this deck, or why we decided to go actually a pendulum-based deck for Qlis as opposed to a back row heavy deck, is because Yu-Gi-Oh has never been in favor of back row heavy decks. If you played a back row heavy deck, you were considered anti-meta, and that's not bad. Being able to play back row heavy and still being able to do your concepts like what Pendulum Monarch, or not Pendulum Monarch, like what Qli Monarch used to do was great. But times have changed, and if you can't make some really good boards on top of that back row, then you're not doing anything. This deck could either make really good boards by abusing the fact that it's a pendulum deck, or play a whole bunch of back row, which will get blown out of the water against better decks. We obviously went for the other route because being able to make big boards and then skill drain your opponent or search to Climate Change to gain all that advantage back was more important to making lose one turn boards that will easily be broken. That's it for the main deck at 42. For the extra deck, we run quite a few cards. 2 copies of Qliphort Genius. I would say you are a genius to run this card. When this card is, you can target one card you control, one card your opponent controls, and negate those cards. That really doesn't do anything against Qli. But the best thing about this card is when monsters are summoned in its zones, that you can search a machine monster from your deck to your hand. Now, Pendulum, or not Pendulum, a lot of decks can do that really well, but no deck really does that better than Qli, because most decks you rely on the Pendulum summon to summon monsters in this scale, but Qliphort Disc can actually summon into this scale as well, so you can get up to 2 searches off of Qliphort Genius. 2 copies of Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. This card is nutty. Just another way to search Qliphort Scout if you need it. And it's just overall a great card, allowing you to tutor cards from your deck to your hand, draw cards, as well as get destructions off, freeing your Qli board. 1 copy of Underclock Taker. This card is really nasty too. Keep in mind, you can only make these monsters if you have no Qli board or no Qlis in your pin scale. But I really like this card as a generic Link 2 monster. Borlo Dragon. You guys would be surprised how many times you can make like Link 4s, and Borlo Dragon's pretty good at stealing your opponent's bitch. 1 copy of Deco Talker, just bicking back, being boo wall, styling, and profiling. The deck is mostly Earth, so Mrs. Radiant is a great card. And then Link Spider can be used, or your Scout, or even your Monoliths can be used to summon Link Spider to give you that arrow pointing down. That's it for the Link monsters. For the Xyzs, we run the Cyber Dragon Infinity combo, 2 Monoliths. Basically, if you can summon Diffs with no scales, that works. Utopia package, not really easy to pull off, but if you can do it, then go ahead. Number 11, Big Eye as R7, and then Constellar Ptolemy M7 as R6, because you can actually summon every single one of those cards with ease. That's it for the extra deck. Let me get you guys into the side deck. For the side deck, we run 3 copies of Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler is growing in popularity. It's actually one of the best hand traps in the meta right now because it shuts off Electromite, it shuts off Trickstar Kadena, it shuts off so many problematic cards in the meta right now. 3 copies of Ghost Winter Arena Cherries. You can run this as literally to hit Electromite if you guys wanted to, or you can make your side deck or your extra deck a little more diverse, dropping Borlo, Mrs. Radiant, stuff like that, and play other cards that are really good against your meta local level area. Hey Trunade, this deck can OTK really fast, so against back row decks, this deck will struggle because breaking their back row is a problem, and that's where Hey Trunade comes in. 3 copies of Mind Crush. This card's nasty good for calling out evenly matched, and of course all of your opponent's problematic cards. And then lastly is 3 copies of Evenly Matched itself. I pretty much did this whole deck on a budget, but there's still a couple of cards we can drop for the budget options. If you guys can't afford Electromite, you can drop it for additional Qliphort Geniuses, which means basically that you have to drop the Astrograph Sorcerers because they're no longer of huge use to you. And if I were you, I'd probably play more. You can play a couple more traps, you can play some Solemns, you can play whatever you want in that aspect, and it's not necessarily going to slow the deck down too much. You just won't have the speed of Electromite into your main board. And of course, instead of Evenly Matched, go ahead and play those Kaijus. Instead of Hatred Age, you can play Cosmic Cyclones or Twin Twisters, and then, damn, the deck is extremely cheap. I think the whole entire deck will be less than $200, so that's pretty good for a Qliphort deck. Thank you guys so much for watching another segment of the Cali Effect. If you guys want to support the best channel in the world, go ahead and check out my Patreon. We have some awesome rewards for you guys. If you guys want to see more videos, go ahead and give this video a like. Also, comment and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe again, but most of all, enjoy.